My name is Marin Vale, 32 years old. The private room at a waterfront place looked like a ship's gallery had swallowed a sunset. Glass everywhere. The bay spread out like a framed promise, white-glove servers moving soundlessly as if the floor itself was a secret. I'd booked it a month ago for my parents' 40th, $5,000 down, a handwritten note on the reservation saying, "Please seat the parents where they can see the water." It felt right. It felt like gratitude. I walked in late by 6 minutes, client call that wouldn't die, and my seat in the center was conspicuously empty, napkin folded with a little flourish like a dare. Aunt Karen clocked me first. Her smile did what it always did, arrived on time and never reached her eyes. "Marin," she sing-songed, already in director mode. Around the table, the choreography clicked into place. Jake leaning back with that barely shaved smugness, Amy staring at her scallops as if they were breaking news, Dad polishing the stem of his wineglass, Mom glowing with hostess by proxy pride. Family, arranged as tableau. In the center lay the lobster platter, bright, impossible red, the crown of the spread. And when I reached for the silver tongs, Karen leaned in, her voice a pin slid between ribs. "Don't touch the lobster," she murmured. "That's for the real family." I held still. For a ridiculous second, I thought I'd misheard her. Then Jake snorted, a frat boy echo he never outgrew. "Yeah, $5,000 dinners aren't for freeloaders," he said, rotating his wine like a knockoff sommelier. A burn crawled up my neck, but didn't make it to my face. I glanced around the table, collecting confirmations. Amy, whose mortgage I'd floated for 3 months, suddenly fascinated by the bevel of her fork. Uncle Frank, who'd begged for a bridge loan for his landscaping flop, chuckling into his napkin. Even my parents stayed perfectly still, like good portraits. No one moved to stop Karen's little coronation. No one broke the spell. Fine. I gripped the tongs, raised a shining scarlet knuckle of lobster, dragged it through butter, so golden it looked rehearsed, and bit down slow. The table's noise narrowed to a thin wire of sound. I chewed. I swallowed. I set my napkin on the charger with ceremony, slid my chair back, and stood. Karen's smile faltered. Jake's grin kinked. Amy finally glanced up, eyes half apology, half panic. Mom adjusted a water glass by 3 millimeters the way she does when she wants something to feel fixable. No one said my name. "Enjoy the view," I said softly and walked out. Past the corridor where the servers pretend not to hear, past the hostess who said Ms. Vale, as if asking whether to chase me, past the floor-to-ceiling windows that kept offering the water back like a mirror. In the cool of the valet circle, I sat in my car with the engine off and my hands flat on the wheel until the pounding in my chest fell into a rhythm. The calm that came wasn't warm. It was slate, the kind of calm that lets surgeons cut. I dialed the number on the back of my black card. "Hi, I need to dispute a charge made just now at restaurant," I said, and the representative's keyboard started its tiny applause. Venue, amount, context. "The reservation was in my name," I added. "My card covered the room and the pre-fixed deposit. I did not authorize tonight's table to run on my card." A pause, polite empathy. Then the clean click of a reversal initiated. The tableau upstairs would discover it in roughly 12 minutes when the manager arrived, with a smile and an apology and a bill for people who suddenly remembered their wallets. Driving home along the bay felt like moving through a glass of cold water. In the living room, I set my keys down, peeled off my heels, and opened my laptop. The confirmation for my gift, the 7-day Caribbean cruise with 2 suites, private excursions, the whole ridiculous dream, sat in my inbox with a subject line that read, "We can't wait to welcome your family aboard." I clicked Manage Booking. A polite chat window bloomed. I typed, "Please cancel and refund in full to the original payment method." The agent asked for the reason. I wrote, "Change of plans." The refund confirmation slid back a minute later, $20,000 returning to where respect still lived. I poured myself a whiskey and stepped onto the small balcony. Below me, the street softened into weekend. In the apartment across the way, a couple laughed in the clinking glass light of their kitchen. My phone buzzed on the counter, then buzzed again, then began to rattle like a trapped thing. Amy, 3 missed. Mom, 5. Dad, 2. Karen, 8. Jake, 10. The notifications stacked like a slot machine. By midnight, the count hit 83. I didn't answer. I let their versions of the story pile up unharmed by truth. I let the tide of indignation slap against a seawall I hadn't had the nerve to build until tonight. When the apartment finally quieted, I texted Noah, "Home. Calm. We'll call tomorrow." He sent back a single dot. Then, "Proud of you. Sleep." I stared at the word proud longer than I should have. Karen has always loved to circle my past with Noah like a vulture. You know his ex Lena still messages him, right? As if implying that everyone eventually chooses someone else over me might keep me in my place. Tonight, the place I chose was outside their circle. I set my phone face down and picked up the picture I still leave on the console table. The last one of all of us smiling without effort before birthdays turned into collection plates. I'd been the family's safety net so long, I'd mistaken the constant ache in my shoulders for posture. Tonight, I put the net down. Morning would arrive with its parade. Dead-eyed texts dressed as concern, a voicemail with weaponized tremble from Mom, a drive-by lecture from Dad about respecting your elders, and Karen's specialty, an attack masquerading as a prayer. Jake would try casual like it was a costume that still fit. Amy would show up at my door with her kids, and a half apology she wouldn't say out loud. But tonight was mine. The air in my apartment felt newly oxygenated, as if returning my own money had somehow returned my own breath. I rinsed the whiskey glass, tucked the cruise confirmation into the canceled folder, and made a new one I named Boundaries. Into it, I dropped a PDF of the chargeback, a screenshot of the cruise refund, and a note to myself with a date and one line. No more invisible subsidies. If it's not in writing, it isn't happening. The phone vibrated again. Karen this time. Ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you. I muted the thread. I muted 3 more. I muted the family group chat where birthdays go to be paid for and where my name is the most frequent verb. Can Marin? Will Marin? Ask Marin. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was clean. I thought of the lobster again. The absurd pageantry of it, the butter shining like consent. I thought of Karen's whisper, real family, and how lines only have power if you agree to stand on their side of them. I thought of my mother's hands adjusting water glasses to keep the world from wobbling, and my father's precise little polishes of whatever was within reach, old habits of people who mistake neatness for goodness. When I finally lay down, the ceiling looked like a screen I could turn off. I did. Sleep arrived without bargaining. Somewhere across the city, a manager was explaining to a room full of relatives why a bill no longer had a patron saint. Somewhere, a travel agent's calendar made a gentle chime as 2 sweets winked out of existence. Somewhere in my parents' kitchen, Aunt Karen was already sharpening the story she'd tell about me. That I ruined an anniversary, that I humiliated them all, that I have always been trouble. They would forget to mention the part where I paid for the room, the view, the toast, the lobster. They would forget to mention who canceled the cruise. They would forget to mention real family. Tomorrow they would remember my door. They would remember how to knock. They would remember every old trick, shame, pity, the sudden fragility of a heart that's robust enough to bully, but too delicate to be told no. I could already hear it. But tonight, the only sound in the room was the soft electronics of a life that paid its own bills. I rolled onto my side, the cool of the pillow a small mercy, and smiled into the dark at a thought that landed like a lever. If they wanted lines, I could make them permanent. At 9:07 a.m., the first knock came like someone trying to make a point with their knuckles. I was halfway through whisking eggs when the Ring camera pinged Amy's face. Flushed, harried, 3 kids orbiting her like small, chaotic moons. I didn't open right away. I finished whisking, turned the burner down, and let her knock again. Boundaries, I reminded myself, were not emergencies. When I did open, the kids burst past my knees with the kind of momentum that makes picture frames nervous. The smallest, Liv, headed straight for the console and reached for the one family photo I hadn't boxed away. I stepped between her and the frame with a smile. "Shoes off, please," I said. Amy blew past the rule, arms crossed over a sweatshirt that read, "Mama needs coffee." "What did you do?" she demanded, voice tight. The restaurant said the card failed. Mom was crying in the hallway. We had to scrape together cash to cover the wine. The servers were professional, I said. They always are. She blinked, thrown by my calm. "And the cruise," she said, already pulling out her phone. "Please tell me that's a mistake. You wouldn't—" I poured coffee into a clean mug, slid it toward her across the island, and nodded at her screen. Check your email. Her thumb flicked. She read. The color left her cheeks like a tide. Marin, she whispered, as if my name were a bruise. Why would you do that? Because last night your aunt told me the lobster was for the real family, I said, as evenly as if I'd said the weather. And my cousin called me a freeloader at a dinner I paid for. You looked away. I tipped my head. Everyone did. Her mouth opened, then closed. A practiced apology almost rose and drowned. You're overreacting, she tried weakly. Am I asked, and gestured toward the living room where her boys were now jousting with my throw pillows. 3 months ago, I wired your mortgage company $5,000 because your refinance hit a wall. I didn't make a speech. I don't make speeches. But I do read the room. Amy flinched, then stiffened. We're family, she said, defaulting to the script. Family doesn't keep score. Family doesn't send a bill for my generosity, I said. They send a thank you. Sometimes they send a boundary. I nodded toward the door. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, Amy. She turned the canceled cruise email around like a talisman. Mom's going to be devastated. Mom's going to be fine, I said, and felt the terrible, clarifying click in my chest of believing it for the first time. She gathered her kids like a storm rounding up rain. At the threshold, she tried one more time. This isn't you. I held her gaze. This is me, I said. The me who doesn't buy lobsters for people who call her a freeloader. When the door shut, I leaned my forehead against the wood just for a breath and let the adrenaline roll through and out. My phone buzzed on cue. Karen, ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Jake, you know it was a joke, right? The lobster thing? Grow up. Fix the cruise. Mom's freaking. Unknown, then saved as Mom. Marin, honey, please call me. I'm worried about you. I played Mom's voicemail twice. There was a tremor I hadn't heard in years, a thin edge of something that sounded dangerously like real fear. My thumb hovered over the callback. Then I set the phone down and texted Noah instead. Amy came by. Cruise news received. Karen's in form. Mom left a voicemail that might be real. He replied almost instantly. Proud of you for pausing. Call me if you want to talk it through, or I can just be quiet and breathe in your ear like a golden retriever. I smiled despite the hollow. Golden retriever mode at 7? I'll bring food, and an actual golden retriever if needed. I put my phone face down again and opened my laptop for the status meeting I actually had. Talk, listen, decide. When it ended, the quiet of the apartment felt bigger, not emptier. I cleaned up the breakfast dishes, wiped the counter in even strokes, and let myself remember how last night had felt when the chargeback email hit, like air finally made it to the bottom of my lungs. By noon, the group chat spun up like a generator. Uncle Frank typed paragraphs about respecting your elders, threaded with misspellings that made the lecture feel less moral than winded. Cousin Jake posted a selfie at the waterfront, captioned, Real Family Brunch, 12 likes inside 60 seconds. The photo showed a table, a view, and 2 empty chairs where a conscience might go. Karen added 3 heart emojis and a verse about forgiveness that landed like a threat. I didn't respond. Silence isn't an absence, it's a position. At 1, my phone lit with a name that still triggered the old reflex to be small. Dad. I let it go to voicemail, then to another. The 3rd time I answered because avoidance can start to taste like fear if you let it. Marin, he said, voice rough with sleep or anger. This has gone too far. Which part? I asked. The part where your sister told me not to touch my lobster? Or the part where I returned money to its rightful owner and canceled a gift your table disinvited me from? He inhaled. You embarrassed your mother. I corrected a bill, I said. Mom embarrassed herself. There was a long, brittle pause. Then he went for the old line he always thought would keep me in orbit. We never asked you for anything you couldn't afford, he said. I laughed once, no humor left to burn. That's exactly the problem. He tried to pivot. Family helps family. Great, I said. When does that start? The line went quiet enough for me to hear the hallway vent hum. He did what men do when logic fails and blood is thicker than accountability, he warned. Money isn't everything, Marin. One day you'll wake up alone. I let his prophecy pass like weather. One day you'll wake up and realize I was alone last night, I said, in a room full of people I paid for. I could practically hear him flinch. I have to jump, I added. Work. You should try it. When I hung up, my hands shook, not with fear, with spent electricity. I stood at the sink and ran the water too long, like a ritual, until the temperature changed. At 2:30, Karen took her campaign offline and appeared in person at my office. I watched her through the glass as she smoothed her peplum jacket and rearranged her mouth into concern. My assistant shot me a look. "Do you want this?" I nodded. I wanted to hear what shape the story had taken today. Karen sat without asking. Her handbag thumped the desk like a gavel. "We need to clear the air," she announced. "Please," I said, gesturing at the air. She assumed the tone of someone nominating herself for sainthood. "You've been under a lot of stress," she said, with a glance toward the photo of Noah and me on my shelf. That told me she still kept Lena's name in her pocket like a party trick. "But punishing everyone over a misunderstanding—" "Misunderstanding," I echoed. "A silly joke," she amended. "And you know how men are," she added with a pointed little smile, "especially ones with histories. People talk." There it was, the soft knife. Noah's ex, Lena. The old gossip Karen wielded like proof I was always someone's second choice. I thought of Noah bringing over dumplings, of him texting me pictures of the sky when my days went sideways, of the silly way he signs cards. Noah, and by extension the moon. "People do talk," I said, "and sometimes they say the quiet part out loud, like which family is real, like who pays, and who gets to pretend that isn't a verb." Her smile slipped. "We're family, Marin," she said, voice sweetening to cover the crack. "Family fights. Family makes up." "Family doesn't make a spectacle of the person who paid for the spectacle," I said. "Family says thank you." She stood so fast her chair nudged the carpet. "Fine," she snapped. "But don't come crying to us when you realize money can't keep you warm." I walked her to the door. "I've been freezing at your table for years," I said. I finally found the thermostat. Back at my desk, my hands moved before my brain tried to explain itself. I opened my estate documents, found the page with beneficiaries, and sat very still. The plan had been simple. A portion for my parents, 529s for Amy's kids, a cushion for emergencies that always seemed to have our last name. It had felt like duty braided with love. I deleted every name. The page looked abruptly, blessedly blank. Then I typed in new ones. A scholarship fund in Grandma Vale's name for first-generation girls in STEM. The shelter that helped a client of mine leave a bad situation. The library that let me hide in stacks when hiding was homework. I saved the document, printed the change form for signature, and set it in the middle of the desk like a small, quiet flag. When I finally looked up, the city outside had shifted from afternoon brightness to that soft, bruised light that makes buildings look honest. I imagined the family group chat buzzing with their favorite genre, me as villain, and felt nothing rise to defend me. I didn't need to be the rebuttal anymore. I needed to be gone. My phone chirped. Mom again. I listened to the new voicemail at my desk with the door closed. "Marin, sweetie, please. Your father is stubborn. Your aunt was thoughtless. But this isn't you. Please call me. I didn't sleep. I keep seeing you walking out. I keep wondering what I could have said." For a moment I saw it, the version where I called back, and she told the truth into the phone like a woman turning herself in. I held the image gently in my head and then set it down. Wanting honesty from people who profit from silence is how you bankrupt yourself. At 7, Noah knocked with Thai food and the look he saves for disasters I navigate without capsizing. He didn't ask for the play-by-play. We ate on the floor like grad students, toes pressed against the couch, steam fogging the takeout lids. He told me a story about a client's dog who refuses to come inside unless bribed with ice cubes. When the food was gone and the apartment was dim, he asked, "You okay?" "I'm not shaking," I said. "That's new," he said softly. We stacked the containers, washed 2 forks, dried our hands on the same towel because the domesticity of it felt like proof of something no one could rewrite. He kissed my temple. "I've got you," he said. "Even when you've got you, I've got you." The night closed around us like a curtain finally willing to fall. In the morning, there would be Dad's truck at my curb, and whatever speech he thought would turn me back into an allowance. There would be more scripture from Karen, more performance from Amy, more cheap sarcasm from Jake. There would be the old weapon, dusted off. "You'll be alone." But in the quiet, lilting hum of the dishwasher, with Noah's hand warm at the small of my back and the document on my desk waiting for my signature, I understood the twist. I wasn't losing a family. I was losing a habit. I turned out the kitchen light, and the apartment didn't feel big. It felt sized for real people. Tomorrow, the next knock. Tonight, the line stayed drawn. The next knock came 3 days later, heavier, slower, the kind of knock that pretends it's patient but demands to be heard. Through the peephole, I saw my father's old work jacket, the frayed cuffs, the grease smudges, the posture of a man who'd made a habit of showing up uninvited and calling it love. I could have let him stand there. I could have let the silence do what it's supposed to, teach people that access isn't entitlement. But curiosity is a terrible negotiator. I opened the door. "Marin," he said, hands buried deep in his jacket pockets. "We need to talk." I didn't invite him in. He stepped inside anyway. He looked around the apartment, scanning the minimalist furniture and the neat lines that didn't match the chaos he'd raised me in. "Nice place," he muttered, sinking into my armchair without waiting for permission. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You drove 2 hours to compliment my decor?" His eyes flicked up, tired and sharp. "Your mother's not sleeping," he said. "She's been worried sick." "Worried I stopped paying for her cruises?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "You think this is funny?" "I think it's predictable." He exhaled through his nose, the way he always did when he wanted to look calm while holding back a shout. "Your mother feels like you've abandoned the family." "I didn't abandon anyone," I said. "I just stopped funding the play." He frowned. "Funding? Marin, for God's sake, we never asked you for anything you couldn't afford." "That's exactly the problem," I said. "You never asked. You expected." He stood abruptly, pointing at me with the same finger he used when I was a teenager, and he still thought he could scare me into submission. "We're family," he said, voice rising. "Family helps each other." "Then where was that family when Karen told me I wasn't the real one?" I asked quietly. "When Jake called me a freeloader? When Amy stood by and said nothing?" He hesitated. "You're overreacting. It was a joke." "Then they can live with the punchline," I said. He rubbed a hand down his face, muttering under his breath, "You're going to wake up one day and realize you pushed everyone away." I smiled, small and sharp. "Then at least the house will be quiet." For a moment, his face softened, the anger cracking just enough for something almost human to flicker through. Regret, or maybe confusion that his old tools no longer worked. Then he turned, muttering, "Fine, if that's how you want it." At the door, he added, without turning around, "Money isn't everything, Marin." I watched him walk to his rusted truck, watched him pull away, watched the thin trail of exhaust twist up into the sunlight like an afterthought. The sound faded. The quiet stayed. That night, I expected the loneliness to hit, the ache that always used to follow whenever I tried to stand my ground. But instead, it felt still, like I'd finally stepped off a treadmill I didn't realize I'd been sprinting on. Noah called after his shift. "Your dad?" "Yeah," I said. "He came, he lectured, he left." "Classic," he said, then softer. "You okay?" I didn't cry, I said, surprised even as I said it. "That's progress," he said. "Proud of you." The next morning, the text messages started again. "Karen, you're pathetic. You know that? Turning your back on family. Everyone knows you're just bitter because Noah's ex still has more class than you. Jake, you always were too sensitive. You think anyone cares about your drama? Amy, Mom's been crying for days. I hope you're proud of yourself." I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hand. It was impressive, really, the speed with which they could twist cruelty into concern, cruelty into virtue. I didn't reply, not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop. If they were going to call me selfish, I might as well make it official. For years, I'd been building my own estate, savings, investments, the small consulting business that had finally started paying off. Somewhere between habit and hope, I'd drafted a will that left pieces of it to them. College funds for Amy's kids, a cushion for my parents, even a small trust with Karen's name on it. Because that's what I thought love looked like, preparing for people who never prepared for you. I opened the document. The cursor blinked beside the list of beneficiaries. Slowly, deliberately, I started deleting names. Amy Vale, delete. Karen Monroe, delete. Frank Vale, delete. Richard and Evelyn Vale, delete, delete. The screen looked suddenly clean, like a wound scrubbed free of infection. I took a breath and typed new ones. The Vale Foundation for Women in STEM, 40%. The Willow House Shelter, 30%. Community Literacy Program, 20%. Marin Vale Memorial. Scholarship, 10%. It wasn't revenge, it was math. When I clicked save, I felt the same lightness I had the night of the restaurant. That specific, crystalline kind of peace that comes only when you stop asking other people to value you. At noon, Karen showed up at my office. Because of course she did. My assistant buzzed through, whispering, there's a very loud woman demanding to see you. I sighed. Send her in. She swept in like a hurricane pretending to be a person. Designer bag, fake pearl smile, voice pitch somewhere between condescension and prayer. Marin, darling, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited. We need to talk. About? She folded her hands. You've been under a lot of stress. Between the boyfriend, the family tension, we get it. But punishing everyone over one silly misunderstanding. I held up a hand. Stop. Karen, you called me a freeloader at a dinner I paid for. That's not a misunderstanding, that's math. Her face twitched. Oh, come on, you know I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? She hesitated, eyes darting toward the family photo, still on my bookshelf. The one I hadn't had the heart to throw out yet. You've always been sensitive. Ever since that thing with Noah's ex. People talk, Marin. I smiled. They do, especially people who have nothing else to do. Her tone sharpened. Family fights, family forgives. It's what we do. Family doesn't humiliate the person paying the bill, I said. Family doesn't weaponize gossip or guilt. Her lips pressed into a hard line. Fine, be that way. But don't come crying to us when you realize you're all alone. I leaned back in my chair. Karen, I was alone that night at the table. This is just quieter. She stared at me for a long moment, then stormed out. I waited until her heels faded down the hallway, then opened my drawer, pulled out the freshly printed will, and signed it in blue ink. It wasn't a declaration, it was a release. That evening, I met Noah for dinner. Nothing fancy, just takeout and cheap wine on my balcony overlooking the bay. The sky burned orange over the water, the same color as the lobster I'd eaten in defiance. He leaned against the railing, his sleeve brushing mine. You look lighter, he said. I am. What changed? I stopped apologizing for being done, I said. He nodded slowly. Good. Then, with a small smile, I always liked the version of you that didn't flinch. I laughed. She's new, still figuring things out. Keep her, he said. For the first time in months, I thought maybe I could. Later that night, a final text arrived, from Dad this time. Come to the house, let's fix this. No punctuation, no apology, just command disguised as invitation. I looked at the message until it dimmed and disappeared. Then I put my phone face down and turned out the light. They thought this was another chapter in the old family drama, that I'd come back like always, softer, smaller, ready to forgive. But they were wrong, because the next act didn't belong to them anymore. Sunday mornings in this city are usually quiet. Seagulls on street lamps, joggers with earbuds, the hum of espresso machines. But that morning, the peace cracked open with a doorbell that rang too long, like someone holding it out of habit. Through the glass, I saw them. My parents, together. Mom clutched her purse to her chest like a shield, red-eyed and trembling. Dad stood beside her, jaw set, the same stubborn tilt that used to end arguments before they started. I thought about not answering, about letting them face the reflection of themselves in the door's glass, but I opened it anyway, because unfinished conversations have a way of echoing even through locked wood. Can we come in? Mom asked. Her voice sounded small, rehearsed. I hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes, I said. They entered like guests at their own trial, slow, cautious, scanning the room as if looking for familiar photographs that weren't there. They sat on my couch. I stayed standing. Mom spoke first. Marin, honey, this has gone too far. I agree, I said. 40 years too far. She blinked, startled. Dad cleared his throat. We shouldn't let a few harsh words tear us apart. Family. Stop, I said. You keep using that word like it still means something. Mom twisted a tissue in her hands. You know your aunt. She runs her mouth. You can't hold everyone responsible for one comment. One comment? I repeated, laughing softly. It wasn't one comment, Mom. It was decades of them. Every, you're lucky we tolerate you. Every, you don't understand what family means. Every time you let them use me and then told me I was too sensitive for noticing. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the posture of a man trying to sound reasonable. You're acting like a child. You think money replaces family? No, I said. I think respect does. His eyes narrowed. You think cutting us off makes you strong? It makes you selfish. The word landed, heavy and familiar, their favorite weapon. I felt the old instinct to explain myself start to rise. Then I killed it. I'm selfish? I asked quietly. For wanting to stop being your safety net? For refusing to let you guilt me into paying for your dinners, your debts, your silence. I've spent years cleaning up after you. I've bought forgiveness you never earned. And now that I've stopped, I'm the problem? Mom started crying, the kind of crying that fills rooms with noise but not sincerity. We love you, she gasped. You know that. Love, I said, isn't supposed to feel like obligation. Dad's face flushed. Enough, you owe us at least respect. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. I owe you nothing, Dad. I gave you more than you deserved, and you turned it into proof I'd always give more. I was your wallet, your peacekeeper, your excuse. He stood abruptly, fists tight at his sides. For a second, the air between us went electric. Then his shoulders sagged. Fine, he muttered, the word breaking on the edges. If that's how you want it, we'll manage without you. He grabbed Mom's arm. She stumbled to her feet, still crying, still whispering my name as if I might dissolve at the sound. They moved to the door. Wait, I said. They both turned. For a heartbeat, Mom's face lifted with hope. I handed her a folded paper, the copy of the updated will I'd printed and signed 2 days earlier. This is the only thing left with your name on it, I said. She took it with shaking hands. Dad snatched it from her and unfolded it, eyes darting down the page. His mouth tightened as he reached the end. You're giving it all away, he said flatly. To people who need it, I said. Not people who expect it. Mom stared at me, her expression collapsing into something halfway between disbelief and grief. You can't mean this. I do, I said. And when you leave, don't look back. I've already built the version of family I want, the kind that doesn't need to be bought. Dad shoved the paper into her purse, muttering something I didn't catch. Then, quieter, almost to himself, you'll regret this. I opened the door. Maybe, I said, but at least the regret will be mine. They left. The door clicked shut, softer than I expected, final as a gavel. I stood there for a while, leaning against the wood, listening to their footsteps fade down the hall. My heart was still hammering, but the usual guilt didn't come. Just silence. Clean, unoccupied silence. Noah called that evening. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't need to. I think he could hear it in my breathing. I heard the echo, he said gently. Feels different this time, doesn't it? Yeah, I said. It feels like the noise finally stopped. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, What now? Now? I said. Now I start rebuilding without them. He laughed softly. You sound sure. I am. The next morning, I opened my curtains and let the light pour in. No dread, no waiting for the next message, just morning. But the world doesn't stay quiet when a story breaks. By noon, my phone was vibrating with new alerts, not from my parents, but from the wider orbit. Cousins, aunts, even people I hadn't heard from in years. The family group chat, once silent, was alive again. Karen, we can't believe you'd do this to your poor parents. Jake, you've always been dramatic. Hope you're happy now. Amy, Mom's devastated. I hope this makes you feel better. They'd rewritten the story, of course. In their version, I was the ungrateful daughter who humiliated her parents, the selfish niece who made everything about money. They were already performing forgiveness for each other online, waiting for me to crawl back and play my part. I didn't. Instead, I logged off everything. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, took out a blank sheet of paper, and wrote the last note I'd ever send them. Forgiveness isn't pretending nothing happened. It's deciding you don't need an apology to move on. I folded it, placed it in the envelope that held all the receipts, letters, and updated will, the one marked, paid in full. Do not reopen. When I slid it into the drawer, the air felt lighter, like a room finally cleared of smoke. That evening, Noah came by with 2 coffees and a small box. Inside was a brass keychain engraved with one word, freedom. He pressed it into my palm. For the new house, he said. I frowned. We don't have a new house. Not yet, he said, smiling, but we will. And for the first time, I believed him. Because some endings aren't tragedies. They're blueprints. 6 months later, I didn't recognize the sound of my own phone when it rang. That's how long it had been quiet. No guilt calls, no guilt texts, no Karen-isms disguised as prayers. Just silence, the kind that stops feeling like punishment and starts sounding like peace. It was spring. The bay outside my window had traded its winter gray for liquid silver. Noah and I had just finished unpacking the last box in our new house. Ours, not borrowed, not blessed by anyone's opinion. The floor still smelled like varnish. The air like new beginnings. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I didn't answer. Noah looked up from the half-assembled bookshelf. Spam? Probably, I said. Or someone realizing too late that I've changed my number. He smiled. Guess they'll have to figure out who you are without a wallet attached. Guess so. He went back to work, and I stood there, watching him fit the shelf together piece by piece. Something about it hit me hard. The quiet steadiness of a life that didn't require me to keep it from falling apart. A week later, an email arrived. Subject line, your family's cruise refund confirmation. The irony wasn't lost on me. The refund had finally cleared through some arcane process of corporate bureaucracy 6 months after I'd canceled it. $20,000 back into my account like an echo from another lifetime. I stared at the number for a long moment, then transferred it directly into the scholarship fund I'd set up under my grandmother's name, the Vail Foundation for Women in STEM. I added one note in the ledger, seeded with what was once an apology. It felt right. By summer, the gossip had burned itself out. Karen had found a new target. Amy had stopped texting entirely, though once in a while I'd see her name pop up on social media, posts about forgiveness and family over pride. I never clicked them. Dad retired quietly. Mom joined a church group 2 towns over. They'd built a new story for themselves, one where their daughter had turned cold, ungrateful, unrecognizable. And maybe they were right about that last part, because the old me, the one who said yes to everything, who paid for love like it came with interest, she was gone. One afternoon in July, as the heat shimmered off the water, Noah and I drove past the restaurant where it all began. The one with the lobster, the view, the laughter that didn't include me. He glanced at the building, then at me. You ever think about going back there? Not for dinner, I said. Maybe to tip the server who saw it all. He laughed, and I found myself smiling too. I think you already did, he said. Just in your own way. That fall, I was invited to speak at the community center, a financial independence workshop for women starting over after divorce or family debt. When I stood in front of them, I realized I wasn't nervous. I wasn't performing. I was just telling the truth. I talked about boundaries that cost nothing and still save your life, about how family and familiar share a root for a reason. Both can keep you in places you've outgrown, and about how forgiveness isn't always reunion. When it was over, a woman in the front row raised her hand. How do you stop feeling guilty? She asked. You don't, I said honestly. You just learn to stop mistaking guilt for love. The room was quiet for a beat, then someone started clapping. That night, back home, I sat at my desk. The filing cabinet drawer creaked open, the one with all the evidence, all the history. I hadn't looked at it since the day I sealed it. The envelope sat exactly where I'd left it. Paid in full, do not reopen. I slid it out, ran my thumb over the faded ink of my own handwriting. I didn't open it. Instead, I took out a clean sheet of paper and wrote one final note to go with it. Debt settled, legacy rewritten, lesson permanent. Then I sealed it back inside and locked the drawer. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the water like reflections of the past. Pretty, unreachable, harmless. Noah called from the kitchen. You want tea or wine? Tea, I said, the kind that doesn't keep me awake. He laughed. You sure? You've been rewriting your life at a record pace. You might as well stay up and enjoy it. I already am, I said, walking toward him. He wrapped an arm around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. So what's next? I looked out the window at the bay. Calm, endless, mine. Whatever I build next, I said. But this time, no one gets to call it theirs. Sometimes I still think about that dinner. The flash of the lobster shell under the lights. Karen's whisper. The silence that followed. And I realized that night wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of my freedom. Because some inheritances are worth losing. And some debts can only be repaid by walking away.